Welcome to London History Episode Part 2. And before we start, let me just say what I got for Christmas. I got such an awesome thing for Christmas. I got 2 economic books, 1 history book, and a full history college course. Yay! Studies in Nova! Happy New Year 2026 and belated Merry Christmas. I learned about something very interesting. There's this day called Boxing Day, which is celebrated on the day after Christmas in England and in the fake country of Canada. My mistake. Does the Hudsons Bay Company still them? No. Stick to the video though. We'll get to them later in the video. So, in England and Canada, this happens where basically, imagine your friend gives you a Lego set. Now, I really love Legos. But imagine you, Joe, you may not like Legos and maybe you want a PlayStation 5. So the next day, you can be the coolest human being on earth to your friend and you can exchange it for a PlayStation 5 and everyone lives happily ever after. Just don't tell them next Christmas. Welcome to London History Episode Part 2. Now, there are a few reasons why we have a second episode on history, of course, because I love it. First, I can't shut up. Second, we can't cram 2 millennia of history in one single video. So, that's why this video is here. Only 2 reasons. You're lucky. Okay, now where were we? Oh yes, in 1066, when William the Conqueror was crowned King of England and also beginning Norman rule in England. The Normans left a huge mark on England, most notably in the language. The Normans, being from the region of Normandy in modern-day France, spoke something around what would one day become French. Maybe. Remember, this is the Middle Ages. Don't expect to be understanding anything people are saying in this era. Anyways, the Normans brought a lot of French and Latin vocabulary to the mainly Germanic English language. English has been affected by so many different peoples that have conquered. For example, the Celts, the Anglo-Saxons, which have contributed a huge part, which is why English is a Germanic language. The Vikings also left their mark on the language. And now the biggest is Latin and French. To this day, many of the more complex words like diplomacy and peace are French and Latin words. And look at the scientific community. They just base naming of animals in random Latin names, like lion is Leo. Who's Leo? Leonardo da Vinci? Okay, never mind. The point I'm trying to make is even to this day, the most simpler vocabulary and language we use today is Germanic. Many common words like the, you, him, they, them, and whatnot are originally Anglo-Saxon and Germanic in pronunciation and also the words. How do I say it? The words came from Germanic roots. So because the very vast majority of common English words are originally Germanic or Anglo-Saxon, that's why English is classified a Germanic language compared to French and Spanish, which are classified Latin or Romance languages. What? Romance? Huh? William the Conqueror and the Normans were very famous for building castles all across England. But by far the most famous one they built was the Tower of London, just east of the ancient and medieval city walls of the City of London. This would one day be the place where the crown jewels will be held, and also a fancy-looking prison. In 1097, William the Conqueror's son, William Rufus, what kind of name is that? He built Westminster Hall, which would one day become the Houses of Parliament, which would one day have a big tower called Big Ben sticking right next to it, and which would one day... We're getting too ahead of ourselves. Anyways, let's talk about something more ancient. We're going to be talking about London Bridge right now. London Bridge was the first bridge to cross the Thames and has been redeveloped time and time again since the Roman times. It came to its most famous form where there were literally buildings on top of the bridge between 1176 to 1209. Imagine you're walking down a bridge, except it doesn't look like a bridge. It looks like a normal street, cramped and dirty. Let's not get into the details. But in reality, you're crossing the Thames River of London. I think the only other bridge in my life that I've ever personally seen and known properly is the Ponte Vecchio. I think I said that right. The Ponte Vecchio, which is a bridge that crosses the Arno River in Florence, Italy. Well, today, unfortunately, you're not going to see buildings on top of London Bridge because it looks like someone who decided to make his religion concretism. It's like someone who decided to dedicate his life to concrete made that bridge. It's just like London Bridge. It's just. In 1216, the First Barons' War happened when many different types of barons and nobles decided to overthrow King John of the Plantagenet dynasty. Some stuff happened, and then somehow the former king of France, Louis, ended up walking and being crowned as king insane. What the hell, France? Again? What? Don't ask which Louis it is. I'll punch you 17 times. The 17th one got be. I know that one. 17th one got. How many Louis do they have? Anyways, eventually the English realized the French suck. So they decided to revolt and go back to the same rulers, the plantation rulers. They sound like a bunch of gardeners, man. How are they kings? And then they got John's son, Harry Potter. I mean Henry, back at the throne. Now to a more darker section of London's history. A little more than a century after the English realized the French suck. They hate Louis. A little more after a century of that nonsense, the Black Death hit London. Like the rest of the continent, London's population plummeted, and obviously the economy and many other things went into shambles, disarray, and chaos. Eventually, a few decades later, London's population recovered and started growing very rapidly. During this time, guilds also started to form, a very major part of economy in medieval urban cities before the Industrial Revolution, where cities really started growing. Guilds are basically when a series of craftsmen in one trade come together. Like, let's say all the psycho blacksmiths who like to keep on hitting iron with iron said to come together, make a guild, and then make sure they control the entire industry. For perspective, that's what a guild is. And stick to the end of the video because later on you're going to really see a defining feature in the word finance in London's history. It's getting a little warm. It's negative digits, Celsius, not Fahrenheit, fake thing. Learn Celsius. It's negative digits outside. I got a little warm because I was wearing too much. Anyways, what the hell? We're changing eras. We're shifting, not medieval gear. We're going to the early modern era. London started to evolve into the early modern era around the time of the Renaissance, like most other places, because people thought Gothic was just not the new trend. And they went to Baroque and Renaissance, and everyone started copying Versailles. I hate Louis, man. Anyways, the modern cooperation, finance, and markets would come to be a key definer of London's history during this period and beyond. Finance and banking started taking root in Europe around the time of the Renaissance, specifically in Italian states like Venice and Florence. Families like the Medicis were very famous in putting banks all across Europe. Certain religious and cultural groups were also prospering in the finance trade, such as the Jewish community of Europe. Families like the Rothschilds, like the Medicis, were very powerful families that exerted their influence throughout finance. London's location on the British Isles made it one of the perfect places to do trade and commerce, with easy access to the North Sea and the English Channel, connecting it much easier to continental Europe. The German Trade and Defense League, called the Hanseatic League, made up of German free cities like Hamburg, Bremen, and Lübeck, started setting up contours, basically trading posts. They made one in London, and they also had ones as far as Novgorod in Russia. London was not only changing financially into the world of modern cooperations as we see them today, but also in terms of religion. The English Reformation started in the early 1500s. Shortly after the Reformation spread throughout the whole Roman Empire, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and beyond. Henry VIII, for very evil reasons, decided to split from the Catholic Church and got excommunicated. He became the head of the Church of England, today known as the Anglican Church. After the English breakaway from the Catholic Church, all the land owned by the Catholic Church was confiscated and given to nobles and whatnot. The most famous example was when King Henry VIII himself took over St. James Hospital and converted it to St. James Palace, which is very close to Buckingham Palace, which is where the Royal Palace is today. earlier in the video, we had already talked about how London's financial heritage and history would start from here on out. So, during the 1500s and 1600s, the first joint stock companies and chartered companies were starting to be formed, predominantly in countries like England and the Netherlands. Now, you might be asking, what are joint stock companies and what are chartered companies? Let me explain. Joint stock companies are like the companies of today that sell on huge stock markets. Today, you can find countries like Nvidia and Google worth more than 1 trillion US dollars. In the 15 and 1600s, this was just starting. The first stock market in the world was opened in Amsterdam, Netherlands, which I've actually seen, by the way. So, joint stock companies are a lot like the modern companies we see today in modern stock markets, where shareholders, whether it be huge wealthy investors or the regular individual, they can buy a share in a company, and if the company makes profits, the stock price goes up and they can book their dividends. The exact same way how we do it today, except a little bit different. Now, chartered companies are companies that have been given a charter by a monarch. Say the East India Company, the British East India Company, was given a charter by the King of England to be able to trade within the East Indies and India. That is an example of how chartered companies work. Now today they are non-existent, but back in the 15 and 1600s, a lot of companies were involved in colonization. For example, as I said earlier, the British East India Company and even the Dutch East India Company as well. We're going to be explaining a few of these companies. The first company we're going to be talking about is the Muscovy Company. Founded in 1555 in London, it was the first joint stock company and I think chartered company as well in the world. The goal of the Muscovy Company was to trade between Britain and Russia. Russia having plenty of bountiful furs, and also before the exploration of North America, where eventually furs started being sourced from there rather than Russia, Russia was the major exporter of furs that supplied most of Europe. Now we are going to be talking about by far the richest company, joint stock / chartered company right here. That is the East India Company, the British one, not the Dutch one. The East India Company was founded in 1600 and, being a chartered company, obviously, was meant to trade in the East Indies and India. The East Indies being Indonesia and Malaysia, and India being a full subcontinent with more than 1 billion people in it today. The East India Company got so powerful after taking over most of India that they had a larger population, economy, and military than Britain itself in terms of pure raw numbers. The East India Company eventually lost power, and by 1858, after a full-blown revolution, or the Sepoy Mutiny as it is known, the East India Company handed control of India to the British Crown, which eventually became the British Raj. That is the insane, very short story of the East India Company, the most power-hungry and by far one of the richest companies in human history. Now, the last chartered company we want to talk about is the Hudsons Bay Company. They did a very similar thing as the East India Company by colonizing and trading, except on a much smaller scale, because if I remember right, the fake land, damn it, I can't hide it anymore. The real land of Canada, the real land of Canada didn't have as many people or economy or just people to shoot with guns, I guess. So anyways, the Hudsons Bay Company took a huge bite of the Russian monopoly on the fur trade towards Europe. The Hudsons Bay Company at a time ruled the majority of modern day Canada, and for perspective, Canada is the second largest country in the world and freezing cold, which is why no one lives there. It's not fake, man. I keep forgetting that. The Hudsons Bay Company, though, did not control many of the populated areas of Canada at all, more so controlling the vast Canadian Shield and the tundra and forests beyond, full of those yummy, luxurious beaver furs. Do they eat beavers in Canada? No, that's their national bird, right? Now, why have I gone into so much detail from finance to colonization to Canadians maybe eating beavers? That's a bird, right? I think so. Anyways, I've gone into that much of detail because number one, I like economics and rambling for no good reason, and Number 2, London was heavily affected by finance in the next coming centuries, and to this day, London is the second largest financial hub in the world, only after New York City. As London progressed throughout time, newer styles of architecture started to come and be more popular in churches and palaces. Before, many churches, at least in Northern Europe, in countries such as France, Germany, and England, the Gothic style of architecture used to be very prominent. But post 1500 and later on into the early modern era and classical era, not classical era, I think just early modern era, and also after the Renaissance, new styles of architecture like Rococo, Baroque, and eventually Neoclassical started coming about. Many palaces and many of the newer churches and palaces of Europe were being built in this architectural style. And for whatever reason, a whole lot of them just decided to copy Versailles. It's like, you want inspiration? Versailles. You want inspiration? Versailles. From Portugal to Russia, just couldn't you come up with your own style? Like, what the hell, man? In 1603, King James VI of England, also known as King James I of Scotland, but no one really cares what the Scots call him, so we're just going to be calling him King James VI. Anyways, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I was supposed to say that later. Oh, yeah. Anyways, King James wanted England and Scotland to be united into one country, but that would only happen a century later. This is where I was supposed to say, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Yeah. In 1603, King James VI of England, also known as King James I of Scotland, but no one cares what the Scots call anyone, so we're just going to be referring him to as King James. Anyways, King James was crowned in 1603, if I'm not mistaken, as King of England and Scotland. He is very famous for sponsoring the King James Bible, the official Bible of the Anglican Church to this day. After the Protestant Reformation, many Bibles were being created in the different indigenous languages of Europe that let the common people read the Bible. Before the Protestant Reformation, the Bible was most often read by clergymen and also read in Latin. So the common people weren't able to read the Bible for themselves in their own languages. Thus, you can see people like Martin Luther and William Tyndale and so many other people that are writing the Bible and translating it into their own nations, areas, indigenous languages. Nation states weren't really a thing yet. King James, being King of England and Scotland, wanted England and Scotland to be one country, even though they were trying to stab each other for centuries. That dream would only come true a little more over a century later, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, I want to take a moment here to look at this wonderful book. I really love cities a lot, and I think one of the best way to see cities while not actually being there is through great urban planning maps. So I have this book, Great City Plans. Let's open it up. Now, as we can see, even with the cover here, Paris has a lot of good maps. London only has 2, but we'll still try and see through it. Anyways, to explain visually what London's development looks like. Wow, beautiful map of Paris right here. This book has completely, so many beautiful visuals from cities all around the world, from the Americas to Asia. Now, London's map is somewhere over here. See if I can find it. Here we are. So now we can properly visually explain how this is going. So this is the central medieval core, as we had talked about earlier. St. Paul's Cathedral is right here, and the Tower of London that William the Conqueror built a few centuries ago is also right here. Now, when you look to the west, you see a lot of buildings have been built, more districts have come, and London has sort of exploded outside of its medieval walls. This is the first bridge London ever had, London Bridge, which, once again, remember I said it looks like some freak show built today. On the southern bank, not much development has had. And finally, here, this road is Whitehall, Buckingham Palace and St. James Palace. You can actually see St. James Palace here. Buckingham Palace, it will soon be around here. The Big Ben is right here with the Houses of Parliament. And a lot of buildings are going to be coming here. And right here is Mayfair, the posh place. So London will really explode, and everything on this map will look like this within the next few centuries. In 1625, after James' death, Charles I of England came to the throne. In 1642, he tried to arrest 5 members of Parliament, and eventually a full civil war happened. The English Civil War, with the Royalists siding with the King and the Parliamentarians siding with Parliament. The English Civil War was a part of a series of wars from 1642 to 1651. These were known as the Wars of the Three Kingdoms: England, Scotland, and Ireland, and Wales is a mythical place because they have a dragon on their flag. I think that's how real life works as well, right? The English Civil War had 2 phases though. The first was a parliamentarian victory, but most of the parliamentarians did not want to completely take the king out, and thus the second phase started. After Charles I got beheaded, the Commonwealth was proclaimed, but it did not last very long, and after 1649, by 1660, they had another Charles lying around. Charles I's son welcomed Charles II. What the hell? Why couldn't they name him Bill or Harry? Why is there no English king called Harry yet? They could have named him Harry. Anyways, Charles I's son, Charles II, became king in 1660. The Commonwealth dictatorship by Oliver Cromwell did not last long at all. But London had a new problem to deal with, not just civil war and beheading their king before the French, and then shouting it out as a victory. From the year 1665 to 1666, 2 great disasters struck London. The first was the Great Plague, which killed tens of thousands of people throughout the city in just 1 year. And in 1666, the Great Fire of London happened. It started in a random lane called Pudding Lane, which was actually a butcher's lane, not a pudding lane. I don't like pudding. Why do I care about Pudding Lane? Anyways, the Great Fire of London started there and then engulfed the entire city. And if you know anything about medieval urban planning, you will definitely know that cities are very tightly packed. Many of the old medieval buildings were destroyed, and London had to draw up a plan to reconstruct most of the inner medieval city. A man named Christopher Wren came out with a plan, as well as many other people that came up with different types of plans for the roads and a lot of other things. But in general, the road layout stayed a brilliant exactly 100% the same. There was absolutely no change because people still wanted to build their houses there, and not everything was destroyed. The most famous part of the reconstruction after 1666 is the construction of the modern day St. Paul's Cathedral. Christopher Wren was the architect behind it and built it in a sort of neoclassical way, implementing many Greek and Roman elements into this. So I would personally say very neoclassical indeed. Today, St. Paul's Cathedral is right in the center of the city of London, and until very recently in the last few decades, it dominated London's skyline along with the big toothpick that had no name, Big Ben. Does have a name. Sorry. For the Great Fire of London being such a huge disaster in terms of pure destruction, only 16 people ended up dying during the event, which is very miraculous from a human cost point of view. Another building that was built during the reconstruction was called Guildhall, where they combined the headquarters of 12 livery companies. I won't go into the details, they're just a type of private company. They combined 12 of the headquarters of these companies into one beautiful building called Guildhall. After the Great Fire of London, the divide between the City of London in the original medieval core and the West End, where the posh place was coming about, I mean Mayfair and Knightsbridge, and also eventually Parliament and Big Ben and all that other stuff, there was a huge divide that was growing between these places ever since Edward the Confessor, which was almost all the way back in 1000 AD. The divide was where the City of London was becoming the financial centre of London and the country, and on the West End, where Westminster was, that was becoming the administrative centre of London and, well, the entire country. London became the dominant centre of trade and finance in the entire country, and in 1694, one of the first banks to be founded in human history, the Bank of England, was founded in 1694. London, as I had said so many times before, had been growing and growing and growing. And within the next century, a lot of the old medieval walls and gates would be destroyed as London completely outgrew its medieval walls. Now, many times in this video, this entire video, we've been talking about London and England. Now, you might be wondering, where's the good old Union Jack and where the hell is the United Kingdom? Because if you didn't watch the first episode of London, you hopefully figured out already that there's a difference between England and the United Kingdom. In 1707, the Act of Union joined the English and the Scottish parliaments, and thus we got the Union Jack. It's a combination of the St. George's flag, which is the English flag, and God knows what the Scottish flag is called. And then later on, they added the Northern Ireland flag, which is where this weird red stripe is. It's barely noticeable. It just makes the flag look cooler than it is already. But we finally got the United Kingdom, or a Great Britain of England, Scotland, Wales is fake, and Ireland. So this is where the United Kingdom officially became a country, and finally those damn Scots finally decided to submit to England and proper civilization. Finally, first heathens to be conquered. Check. I mean people to be conquered. we do not believe in slavery. Well, do not say too much. Anyways, a year later, St. Paul's Cathedral as we know today, the beautiful cathedral that would dominate London skyline until they bent a bunch of toothpicks in the air. Bloody hell, oh my god. It was completed in 1708, 1 year after the Act of Union. Now, after 1700, you really start to see with Great Britain as a full sovereign country, with the bloody Scots over as well. English colonialism, well now I should say British colonialism from now on, started to grow more and more. And the colonies across the Atlantic in what would one day become the United States of America were growing much more rapidly and were being much bigger than, say, French or even Spanish colonies in the New World. London was growing in all directions. In the West End, which has always been growing, like I've constantly mentioned, the West End is growing. But when it's come to newer parts of the city that were being developed in the 1700s and 1800s, to the East End were the Docklands and also the poorer part of the city. The Docklands were leading to the east with the Thames towards the ocean, and London had a huge south divide. Well, not south divide. North of the Thames, as we saw in the map earlier in the video, you could see that there was a big north-south divide purely in terms of looking at how the city was being developed. The north was very much developed with the original city of London and the West End and the Docklands as well. But to the south, with only very few bridges being around, well, not in the map is a bit later, but for most of London's history, London Bridge was the only way of crossing the River Thames. This heavily hampered development south of the River Thames. But now, with the emergence of the Industrial Revolution in England and, well, Britain, I should get used to saying Britain now. This entire past 2 episodes, I've been saying England. After more bridges started being built across the Thames through the Industrial Revolution, the southern side of London would also be heavily developed. The British Empire that would one day come to dominate the 19th century all across the world was relatively small compared to the Spanish and French empires during the 15th, 16th, and even 1700s. The Spanish literally striking a gold mine in the New World, with Christopher Columbus arriving in 1492 for perspective, had been growing colonies all across Central America, the Caribbean, and South America, and were by far the largest profiteers of the entire New World. Well, peaceful operations. This made Spain the richest country in the world and facilitated many trading routes into the 15th and 16th and 1700s, which unfortunately I have not mentioned until now. I should have mentioned it earlier. Many trade routes were starting to take form. The Portuguese, with Vasco da Gama, ended up setting foot in India around the early 1500s, I think. I've not got my dates right on this one. Sorry. While the Portuguese found a way to get around Africa to reach India and the East Indies and China, Japan, and beyond, the Spanish, once again with Christopher Columbus, head west and founded not founded, it was already there, clearly, as we can see. They found the New World before, and the Vikings, we're not going to count them. They didn't record anything. Remember, people, if you're a historian, record everything you do. The Vikings didn't record anything. No one cares. The Vikings did. They were just a bunch of red-headed psychos running around. Wait a minute, the Vikings are already dead by now. Historical context. Remember that too. Anyways, the French also came on board and took over colonies in what is now Canada. Oh my god, I didn't say it was fake this time. Oh. But the English went right in the middle between Spanish and French colonies, at least in the North American sense, and took over the 13 colonies which would one day become the land of gun mania. I mean, the United States of America. Like, they literally took states very literally. There were 13 countries, but then later on they became states. Why are we talking about something that happened 70 years later? Anyways, the English had colonies in North America and India, and with this, they came into a lot of conflict, especially with the Spanish and the French. The idea of pirates and privateers came a lot from the English and the British, who were trying to raid Spanish galleons, sending gold and many other materials towards Spain and later on to other trades. One example of a really profitable trade was the silver trade. I actually learned about this very recently because when you think about trading routes, you think about very famous trading routes like the Silk routes and whatnot. The silver trade happened because China decided they didn't want to collect taxes in the dumb rice system. I mean, they didn't want to collect rice taxes, like literally their taxes were on rice. They wanted something shiny, something new. They wanted silver. And thus, the Spanish literally set up an entire economy, literally the entire regional economy of southern South America. What the hell? They literally set up the entire economy of a huge portion of South America around a single city called Potosi. And this silver trade was so profitable, shipping silver from the New World to Spain to China, that literally the city of Potosi, where the largest silver mine was in the area, had the same population as Paris at the time. So, as you can see, we went into a lot of detail earlier in the video about private corporations, joint stock companies and chartered companies, but not so much about the trade routes they passed. Within the New World, there was an exchange called the Colombian exchange. From the New World, crops like potatoes, which heavily profited the Russians, Ukrainians and the Irish. Let's not talk about the Irish. They heavily profited countries that had harsher climates like Russia and Ukraine, which were the two and still are today the two largest agricultural countries of Europe. Countries with those kind of climates heavily rely on potatoes, carrots and beets, all of which were bought from the New World. In return, well, not in return, they gave disease, but in return, the Europeans bought horses and cattle and also livestock along. Today, countries like Argentina have huge economies based around livestock that the Europeans bought centuries ago. The Colombian exchange proves that it's not just humans, capital, and profits that go around to trade, but also even simple plants. The English, French, and Spanish fought many wars against each other. Well, not just the English, French, and Spanish. Many other European countries fought wars against each other in the New World. And one of these wars, which sometimes by some people is called the First World War, happened. It was the 7 Years' War, which actually started as the French and Indian War, as it is known in the United States, when a certain man called Washington George decided to shoot a bunch of Frenchies because the English have never liked the French. And they also shot some Native Americans too. So what was the French and Indian War spread out to the much larger 7 Years' War, which spanned over the Americas, which already where it started. It spanned across Europe, with all the great powers joining in, and it even went into India, since European colonies and settlements had already popped up there around 1500 approximately, I think, yeah. The 7 Years' War was the last blow. Well, not the last blow. They would still kill each other a couple decades later. But for now, it was the last and final blow after so many wars of not only colonial wars, but even wars of religion between England and France and many other countries on the continent. France literally lost all of its European colonies in Canada, Beaverland. even to this day, believe me, I've been in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. I'm trying to say this in a Canadian accent. I've been to Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, and Quebec City, and I can tell you, the French, they're just obnoxious in Quebec. They'll only put the French, and I'm telling you, go to Ontario, you'll see, yeah, English and French. How inclusive. In Quebec, they're like, none, we are French. Like, oh my God, let the Germans give it to you, man. Oh my God. Anyways, the French ended up losing literally all of their colonies, which heavily hindered French colonial progress and also gave a lot of, well, not a lot of, but a bit more leeway for British colonial expansion into the next century, the 19th century. Now, at least in American history books, it's very famous that after the 7 Years' War, which they call the French and Indian War, because they themselves were shooting French. And why do they call them Indians? I don't like Christopher Columbus for that one thing. Indians, like, just... Which Indians? Malayalis or Tamils? They'll kill each other over dosa, man. Anyways, at least in American history books, it's widely talked about how King George III of Britain wanted taxes from the colonies because they had just fought a full, literally, some people literally call it the First World War. That's how huge it was and massive it was. So Britain's treasury was, a bit low. Not the best, not the first time either, like, really. But because of that, a bunch of people that decided that people should have rights, human beings should have rights, and should actually vote for the leaders they put, not just, hello, uncle is here, uncle's beta comes. Son comes. Sorry for my little tinge there. The Americans, or the British Americans, however you want to call them, well, those are the Canadians. Anyways, the Americans, they fought the American Revolutionary War from 1776 to 1783, I think. They officially got independence in 1783, and that was a huge blow to the British Empire at first. Like, how could you imagine at that time, they literally lost their largest colony and also like one of their first colonies in history, and then you think that literally a century later, 1883, Britain is the largest freaking empire in the world, and Germany and America are barely starting to compete with them industrially and economically. Not exactly like that. But that was an absolute huge blow to the British Empire. In 1761, King George III, a few years before the American Revolutionary War, he bought Buckingham Palace. This would one day become the main royal residence that many people know today under Queen Victoria's rule. During the same period, a decade earlier, 11 years earlier, in 1750, the second bridge that crossed the Thames in the London area, the Westminster Bridge, came about. And earlier in the video, I said that the north-south divide of London, where the north was more developed than the south, was a huge part because there was only one bridge for centuries. Like, oh my God, like what? You stopped updating more bridges? Well, you updated the bridge you had, but you stopped updating since the Romans? Like, oh my God, like today, technology packs updates are happening every 10 hours, I think, right? Stay tuned for our next episode of London History Part 3.5 because I just couldn't shut up about history.